Hey guys, welcome back, it's Meg. Today we are going to be going through the full Mistweaver guide for 10.0 PvE. We will be discussing the basics for healing and damage, as well as talents, stats, rotation, and utility. I also have a written guide if you prefer that format, and that will be updated regularly throughout the patch. Mistweaver is a fast-paced melee healer with positional requirements. We do a majority of our healing through damage to healing transfer abilities. We have hot maintenance that allow us to set up for group-wide damage, as well as cooldowns that heal for great amounts with minimal mana use. There are some challenges that Mistweaver face as a melee healer, but they can be made up for through careful play, planning, group coordination, and general awareness of your situation. I've been playing Mistweaver since mid-BFA. I dropped it for a while and then picked it up again as a main late in 9.0, and I have become very familiar with the spec. If you're looking for something fun and interactive to play, Mistweaver is a great choice because of the high activity it requires, as well as the challenge of being in melee. The spec has a lot of depth and it never really gets old. I hope that you find the guide helpful, and if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitch or Discord or in the comments. Starting out, I want to go over our healing. This is not just the baseline abilities, there's also some talents in here, but these are the most important things to know when it comes to healing abilities. First off, we have Gusts of Mist. This is a passive ability. It is also our mastery. So the higher mastery that you run, the more you're going to feel the impact of this ability. It is applied through Renewing Mist, Enveloping Mist, Vivify, Chi-Ji, and Revival. Gusts of Mist is from the player, and then there is also a Gust of Mist that is also mastery based from Chi-Ji that will show up as a different ability in details and logs, but they are both affected by mastery. This is going to be where a lot of our healing ends up coming from in Mythic Plus, mostly because of Chi-Ji, but also some through other healing abilities, and in Raid it is the same thing. You will see most of it from Chi-Ji, but also from other healing abilities like applying your Renewing Mist, as well as the occasional Vivify. Next up, we have Ancient Teachings. This is a talent, and this is mostly maintenance healing, but it does represent well overall. It is usually our first or second highest healing ability in both Mythic Plus and in Raid. It shows up as two different entries for details and logs. There is the one entry of critical strikes and then one entry of non-critical strikes, but added together, normally the first or second highest healing ability overall. This is activated by Feline Stomp or by Essence Font, and our uptime on it should be very high in Mythic Plus. You should not be relying on this ability to heal heavy damage events. It is purely maintenance. It's also a little bit RNG on who it heals. It is not considered a smart heal. Soothing Mist is a very important ability that we have, although it's not necessarily a heal because we don't use it for the healing that it actually does. It is more of a tool to make Vivify and Enveloping Mist instant. You only use it when you need to cast more than one ability on the same player, depending on your haste. Usually I will only use this when someone has a heavy dot or is taking sustained heavy single target damage, or when the tank is in a bit of trouble. But normally Soothing Mist is not something that we're going to be using a whole lot in Mythic Plus, and we will use it even less in a raid setting. Renewing Mist is an integral part of the current playstyle. Our goal is to keep this on cooldown. They also jump around, so you can apply it to whoever could use a gust prop, or if everyone is full health, I usually use it on my tank and myself. Targets healed by Vivify will also be healed for a portion when Renewing Mist is active on them. This is a hot that gets extended with Rising Mist and allows us to set up for incoming group-wide damage. Vivify is our main single target heal, and I had mentioned Vivify cleaving with Renewing Mist just previously. It can function as an AoE heal for targets with Renewing Mist on them, and that is what we are referencing when you hear Vivify cleave or Renewing Mist cleave. This is the interaction that we're talking about. So this is made instant by Soothing Mist as well, and this is really our main triaging ability when it comes to single target and AoE healing outside of cooldowns. Enveloping Mist is used during Celestials, either Yu'lon or Chi-Ji, and this will trigger a different healing event from them, but we will talk about that a bit later because the Invoke Celestial is a bit of a dense ability and there's kind of a lot going on. But for Enveloping Mist, it's only really used during heavy single target damage, but we do get procs of this through a talent that we will discuss later on. Essence Font is kind of a weird ability. We take it, although we don't actually use this. We will end up using Feline Stomp for the use of Essence Font anyway. It will trigger Ancient Teachings and apply the Essence Font Hot, which is all we really used it for anyway in a Mythic Plus setting. In a Raid setting, we will be taking Upwelling, so Essence Font is much more of an impactful ability there. But in a Mythic Plus setting, and generally Feline will do most of what Essence Font does for us. Feline Stomp will trigger Ancient Teachings, and it will also apply the Essence Font Hot. This ability needs to be stood in for the damage and for the healing aspects of it if you have any of the talents for it. It's a little bit wider than it looks, but I do have a weak aura that acts as an indicator that triggers off of Awakened Feline or off of Ancient Concordance that I will post a link in the description to. It does get hidden behind some mechanics. Sometimes it's just a bit misleading in the visual. It deals damage and applies the hot on use, but after the initial hits, only your character needs to be in it to benefit from the effects. With the use of Ancient Concordance and Awakened Feline, it allows us to cleave with Blackout Kick and Tiger Palm, as well as heal through Spinning Crane Kick. Zen Pulse will trigger an AoE at a friendly target that will heal the friendly target for a portion of the damage dealt. This is a little bit more of a niche ability, but it does have potential in some of the dungeons due to mob density. Thunder Focus Tea is one of our modifiers to our spells. When you use Enveloping Mist with Thunder Focus Tea, you will get a hefty single target heal, in addition to the normal effects with the hot. Renewing Mist will have an additional 10-second duration. Vivify has no mana cost. Rising Sun Kick's cooldown is reduced by 9 seconds, and Essence Font channels 100% faster. Secret Infusion is a talent that we have an option to take, and that will modify Thunder Focus Tea, so you gain additional effects. When you use Enveloping Mist, you will get crit, Renewing Mist gives haste, Vivify gives mastery, Rising Sun Kick gives versatility, and Essence Font grants haste. In a raid setting, because we are running Upwelling, we will be using our Thunder Focus Tea with Essence Font most of the time. In a Mythic Plus setting, it's a little bit more versatile and situational. Typically, I will use it with Rising Sun Kick for the damage, but you can also consider Enveloping Mist for the heavy single target heal, or Vivify for the mana-free use. Our DPS abilities are relatively simple, as they are for all healers. So starting out, we have Tiger Palm. This is a simple one-target builder. It generates stacks of Teachings of the Monastery, and if using Awakened Feline, it will hit one target twice per Tiger Palm. Blackout Kick also cleaves with Awakened Feline, and this is your spender. It will spend the Teachings of the Monastery stacks. We usually use this at 2 stacks to get a chance on a reset for Rising Sun Kick, as well as healing through Ancient Teachings. We use it on cooldown for the best value on RSK resets, as well as high DPS through cleave. Rising Sun Kick is another single target ability. We use this on cooldown to extend hots through Rising Mist, which is a talent. It's often used with Thunder Focus Tea for a shortened cooldown, and it will also apply a Renewing Mist if you are using the correct talents. Spinning Crane Kick is our easy one-button AoE damage that we have. This is going to be a lot of our damage overall, and it will heal if you are standing in your Feline and also using Awakened Feline. That pretty much covers all of our basic abilities or important abilities that you are going to want to be very familiar with. When we talk about cooldowns, we don't really have a whole lot. We have Life Cocoon. By itself, it's alright, but with Mist of Life, the talent, it actually does a pretty good job of either preventing damage and healing anything that the shield doesn't cover, or after taking damage, shield and heal them up while benefiting from the hot healing increase. When it comes to Chi-Ji, this ability has so much more going on than the tooltip lets on, so I do actually have a whole separate video on this cooldown alone that you can find on my channel. It's about 7 minutes, and in the video we cover where healing comes from, how to utilize Chi-Ji, as well as the rotation for the Jade Bond and the Gift of the Celestial builds, so if you're looking for more information on that, I'd highly recommend that video as we go really in-depth into the ability. Revival procs a Gust of Mist, which is the mastery that we talked about earlier, but it is also a small portion of its own heal, as well as a master spell for magic, poison, and disease. If you want, you can take Restoral, which is the exact same ability as Revival, but it removes the magic dispel portion of the ability. This is mainly used for raid instances where you don't want certain magic effects being dispelled, but you do need the throughput from Revival. Now, when we are talking about talents, I'm not going to go over the entire tree, but I am going to go over the key points. I have these color-coded for convenience. Green is what is going to be run all of or most of the time. Orange is something that you can take if you find it more convenient or they're situational. And finally, the red talents are what I would hard avoid in every form of content, as there are different priorities for Mythic Plus and for Raid. Starting out, we are going to talk about the Mythic Plus build for class and spec trees. We have Rising Sun Kick. This is one of our highest damaging abilities for single target, and also it allows us to extend hots as well as proc Renewing Mist through a couple of different talents that we will talk about later on. Vivacious Vivification is our instant Vivify every 10 seconds. It is a rolling timer, so it's a little unpredictable, but there are weak auras out there that track it. I personally don't bother with a timer tracker, I just track to see if I have the buff, mainly because if I need to Vivify, I'm not going to sit and watch the timer and wait for the instant one, I'm just going to cast one instead. Spearhand Strike, it is almost guaranteed that you're going to run this in Mythic Plus. This is our kick, it is melee range, and I cannot think of a time where I would ever want to go without this. That being said, there's maybe 1 or 2 situations where you may drop it, but I wouldn't recommend doing this in pugs. I would only do that in a coordinated group that already has a good amount of melee kicks. In raid, this is more fight dependent, but generally not something that we're going to be running, as there are other things that we can take that will either impact our damage, our survivability, or our throughput. Next up, we have Close to Heart. In Mythic Plus, this has a slightly lower value than it does in Raid. It increases the healing taken from all sources for 4% for 1 point or 8% for 2. This is one of the party buffs that we bring, and it does greatly benefit melee as well as the tank, but ranged may also benefit situationally. On the other side of the tree, this is our second party buff. We have Generous Pour. This will give you 2 or 4% avoidance to the people around you, as Mythic Plus players frequently foam at the mouth for avoidance. Being able to contribute a portion of this is extremely valuable, and we also do benefit from this in Raid. Next up, we have Save Them All, and this ability I have some personal issues with and how it is incentivizing us to play in Mythic Plus, but it is undeniably strong. Hots like Renewing Mist and Enveloping Mist will proc this automatically if someone drops below the 35% health threshold, so it's very easy to have high uptime on this, especially when you're playing with things like Blood Decay, as they are frequently dropping below that threshold. This also benefits us greatly for AoE healing on big bursty packs. There's no internal cooldown on it, so uptime can be extremely high both in Raid and in Mythic Plus. This accounts for, I think it was about a 20% healing increase overall. For Resonant Fists, in Mythic Plus, this is going to represent very well, especially for being a passive ability. It is about 10% of our overall, and passive damage is something we are always looking for, especially as a Mythic Plus healer. In Raid, it represents a little bit lower on things like single target fights, but it is definitely noticeable on those fights where we've got like 2 to 3 targets at any given time. That will be a good portion of our damage as well. So that was the class tree for Mythic Plus. Next we are going to move on over to the spec tree for Mythic Plus. Starting out, we have Rapid Diffusion. This is where a lot of our maintenance healing comes from, especially as it is similar to a damage to healing type ability. Between Chi-Ji and our normal DPS rotations, it becomes really easy to blanket your party in Renewing Mist. Dancing Mist, this talent also plays into the blanket of Renewing Mist that we'll have. This does interact with Rising Mist and the Hot extension. Misty Peaks is once again a proc-based healing talent. This also interacts with Rising Mist as well as Mist Wrap. Rapid Diffusion and Dancing Mist as well as Misty Peaks are all basically rewards for playing properly. Through the intended playstyle, you gain extra hots for doing what you're supposed to do with your normal rotation, and this adds up over the course of the fight or the key. Jade Bond versus Gift of the Celestials. This is a choice node right under your Celestial pick, and it determines whether or not you have a stronger Celestial on a longer cooldown or a weaker one on a shorter cooldown. This is dungeon or raid boss dependent, and both of them will see use. Ancient Concordance allows our Blackout Kick to cleave onto additional targets while we are in our Feline Stomp. This does not work with Spirit of the Crane, but it does contribute to healing through Ancient Teachings, as well as Chi-Ji's Gust of Mist. This is a big portion of our damage in Mythic Plus, as well as cleave fights in raids, and it also contributes a large amount to our overall healing. Awakened Feline allows for Tiger Palm to strike an additional time while standing in Feline Stomp, and this works very well with Ancient Concordance, and this is a big boost to our single target damage as well as our rotation during Celestial on single target fights. As we change gears to talk about Raid, we're going to discuss the class tree. It is actually very similar to our Mythic Plus tree, only a couple of things change. We can drop Paralysis as well as Fatal Touch, and we can pick up Escape from Reality. We are dropping a super small amount of execute damage and a bit of non-unique utility to enable higher throughput in a raid setting. And for the Raid spec tree, there's a little bit less flexibility than in Mythic Plus. We will take most things very similar to Mythic Plus, except we will opt into Upwelling and Invoker's Delight instead of going all the way down into the Feline area. In cleave fights, we will run the full Feline build, but for the standard raid build, we will include Invoker's Delight and Upwelling. Overall, our talents are very versatile. We can change a lot of different things to get particular builds for Raid and for Mythic Plus, both settings. Mythic Plus has a little bit more flexibility in my opinion, based on the route that you're doing, the weekly affixes, the dungeon, as well as the key level, whereas Raid you're more looking at the number of targets and the damage patterns. But nevertheless, they are both very flexible, and there are a lot of different customizations that you can do to each of the trees for each form of PvE content. Taking a look at our stat weights, we are going to have main stat at the top for both Raid and for keys, and then for keys we have Haste, Mastery, Verse, and then Crit. For Raid we have Haste, Crit, Mastery, and Verse. The main reason that we are prioritizing Haste and Mastery so high is because Haste will make our hots tick faster, we will have faster cast times, as well as a lower GCD, which allows us to get more resets on Rising Sun Kick, which is a damage and a healing increase. And for Mastery, this is very good for throughput, and the dungeons that we're seeing have legitimate healer checks. Chi works almost entirely off of Mastery, as well as a handful of other non-cooldown healing spells, so this is actually a very good stat for our throughput. For the Mythic Plus playstyle, we are very versatile and we can do effective healing, even with positional requirements. You will want to be in melee as much as you can, as a lot of our healing is from damage to healing abilities. It is a bulk of our maintenance healing and represents very high overall. Through Rising Mist, we are setting up HOTS to effectively AoE heal when burst damage comes out party-wide. We can still cast a decent amount, especially in higher throughput dungeons, but your goal should always be to remain in melee. In addition to the normal DPS rotation, you're going to make sure that you are keeping Renewing Mist and Rising Sun Kick on cooldown. Try to keep Ancient Teachings up as much as needed, using Phalanx Stomp to trigger it when there's damage going out or about to go out. Take advantage of the free Vivifies that you get through Vivacious Vivification, but also be prepared to do more casting for burst damage outside of cooldowns. For your damage rotation, it is going to be Phalanx Stomp, Rising Sun Kick on cooldown, Blackout Kick on cooldown, and then Tiger Palm as a filler. For 2 to 4 targets, it is going to be Phalanx Stomp, Tiger Palm, and Blackout Kick. We're going to try to use Blackout Kick on cooldown for that cleave damage through the Phalanx talents. If you want to contribute some healing during this, you can also use Rising Sun Kick for the Rapid Diffusion Renewing Mist procs, as well as the Ancient Teachings procs. But if you're just looking at damage, it is just going to be the back and forth Tiger Palm and Blackout Kick while standing on Phalanx. And after about 5 to 6 targets, we are just going to be spinning Crane Kick spamming. This is a pretty high represented damage ability on details overall, especially in dungeons where there is more AoE than there is cleave. For healing rotation, there isn't really a rotation because healing and damage taken is inconsistent, but when damage is going out, you should have Renewing Mist and the Essence Font hot on them already. Without cooldowns, triaging through maintenance is just keeping hots up and relying on Ancient Teachings and Instant Vivify. For heavy single target damage, you can Soothing Mist, Enveloping Mist, and then Vivify until they're healthy. For 2 to 3 target damage, you want to make sure you are healing the lowest health target with Soothing Mist, Enveloping Mist, and Vivify, and that will be cleaving on to the other 2 that are injured, and then you can occasionally swap to the new lowest target or the target with no defensive or incoming damage and repeat. You will also have to reapply your Renewing Mist and your Essence Font hot as needed. And for group-wide damage, it's a bit similar to the 2 to 3 target damage. You're going to Vivify the lowest health target and leverage Vivify Cleave to keep the others maintained, and then you're going to just repeat this until the damage stops and you can effectively stabilize. When it comes to Raid, it's a little bit different, but it is largely the same. It is important to stay in melee for a majority of the time, outside of things like doing mechanics that may require you to leave, but you should always get back in as soon as you can, especially now that we are using Chi-Ji in Raid and are less likely to use Yu'lon. In Raid, in addition to the normal DPS rotation, you're going to want to keep Renewing Mist and Rising Sun Kick on cooldown, keep Ancient Teachings active either through Essence Font or Phalanx Stomp, and use Vivify sparingly, but you can use it as needed because we are not going to be spending nearly as much mana as we have in prior tiers. In Mythic Plus, we don't use Upwelling at all. This is a raid-only thing, so in Mythic Plus, you can use Thunder Focus Tea on Rising Sun Kick, Vivify, or Renewing Mist, but if you are in Raid, you are going to be holding on to Thunder Focus Tea for that Upwelling full-stacked Essence Font. When it comes to utility, we have Mystic Touch, which is just going to be contributing to our physical damage as well as everyone else's physical damage. This is our third party buff that we bring. We have Ring of Peace, which is a mob displacement ability. It will not trigger combat, so you can use it to utilize skips and things like that, as well as using it as a stop. It also works very well when it comes to things like Sanguine, when we're talking about Mythic Plus and how it handles affixes. Leg Sweep is an AoE stun, which is always helpful to have, and Paralysis is a soft CC that also does not trigger combat, so pairing that with Ring of Peace is also very useful for moving mobs around without triggering combat. It can also be used as a stop. Spearhand Strike is our kick. It is melee range and it is extremely useful, especially in these Mythic Plus dungeons where we have a lot of kicks happening all at once. Song of Chi-Ji is something you see more so in PvP, but it does have some use in PvE, mainly dungeons. I don't think I will personally be using it, but we do have access to it. Diffuse Magic is a self-dispel as well as a pseudo-spell reflect. Some of the abilities that you can use it on are going to contribute to your damage overall. I have a spreadsheet with all of the interactions with Diffuse and all of the new dungeons, what will diffuse, what you'll get damage out of, and what you won't. And finally, we have Tiger's Lust. This is an anti-root and anti-snare, and it is also a movement speed increase that you can use on other players. Overall, Mistweaver is in a very solid position going into Raid as well as Mythic Plus. This is the most fun version of Mistweaver that I have ever personally played, and I'm really looking forward to see how this goes. Like I said in the beginning of this video, I do also have a written version of this guide with all of the links to the talent builds as well as additional spreadsheets like things for Chi-Ji, Tiger's Lust, and Diffuse. So if you're curious about that, go ahead and check those out. I will put those in the description as well as the written guide. And that brings us to the end of the guide. If you guys have any comments or questions or concerns, please feel free to let me know in the comments. I will respond to them as soon as I can, and I hope that this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.